Hello, I'm Mary Fitzgerald. I'm from Open Democracy. It's quite good to go right after Jarvis Cocker, isn't it? He made it all sound so easy. This one is going to be...
When I was 15 and a massive indie kid, this wasn't the moment in terms of coming on after Jarvis Cocker I had in mind.
Well, now, you know, we've all agreed that this is going to happen and we can dance. It's fine. But this panel actually is going to talk a lot more about the practical questions involved. I wanted to introduce Stella Creasy, MP for Walthamstow, who's going to talk a little bit about how we get to a second referendum, what are the mechanisms, what's the process we need to go through, what precedent are there for all this. And please explain it to my aunt who's sitting in the back row, who's here from Washington, DC, and doesn't understand half of this madness and hasn't been following it has not been following it obsessively like the rest of us. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Good afternoon, everybody. I think that Brexit has become a bit for the British public like urinary tract infections and bad breath. Unspeakable. Put your hands up if somebody said to you over the Christmas period, no politics, we're not talking about that.
That's about everybody.
And one of the challenges that we have in finding a way forward is finding a way as a country to be able to talk about difficult issues, to actually be able to find a way to resolve it. One of the things that worries me right now is that the instinct people are encouraging is to walk away and go and talk to somebody who agrees with you, rather than to find backup and listen to be able to have that conversation. So whether bluntly within my own political movement people are being encouraged to resign rather than argue for something, or in British politics right now where you're seeing some of the horrific protests outside where people are being encouraged to shout at each other as if that is talking things through. But we are not unique as a country in facing difficult issues. We're not unique as a nation in finding it hard to talk together, to find that common ground, to find that way forward. So I'm here today as somebody who never inhaled on Brexit. I didn't even vote for Article 50. That's how pure I am. Wait for it. To deliver that tough message, because actually, anybody who thinks this is easy, anybody who thinks the division and dissent and disagreement that we're seeing right now and the possibility and the fear that people have about civil disorder if we do have a second referendum is somehow just a matter for the police is very privileged. I represent one of the poorest communities in our country. I represent a community that has been horribly divided by Brexit. People in my community who've already lost their jobs because of the uncertainty. People from our European friends and families in our community already worried about their status in our country, already seeing the impact on our public services. They need us to get this right. And my difficult message for you today is how we get to that second referendum will define the outcome. And that, for me, is why I think we should learn from what other countries have done when they've had these difficult decisions to make, these difficult conversations, and use a citizens' assembly to be able to look at these issues. Now, what do I mean? Oh, thank you. What do I mean by that? So I look at the example of Ireland. Ireland has held 5 citizens' assemblies in recent history on issues that were incredibly divisive, where people couldn't talk about them for decades. You will probably be aware of them on same-sex marriage and abortion, but they've also held them on things like constitutional reform and the future of adult care. Difficult issues, complicated issues. And what they've done is bring together 100 people who are demographically representative of the public to look at and consider all the different issues and then make recommendations to their parliament. Now, often when I talk about citizens' assemblies, people say, oh no, we already have one of those. It's called Hogwarts down the road. I've been a member there for 8 years. This isn't the same process at all. It's about how we can bring the public into a conversation with parliamentarians, with politicians, about the different choices, the different views, the different experiences we have in our country, and rebuild our trust in our ability to make decisions at all. because I get it. None of you trust me. I'm a politician. But you know what? People haven't trusted politicians for generations. Go and look at the Hogarth pictures. Now what you're all wondering is, even if you could trust us, could we really make a difference at all? And having been sat in Parliament for all the Brexit debates, I can understand why you might think that. This is about efficacy. And the point about a citizens' assembly is it allows all sides of a debate, everybody who has an opinion, to be heard equally, not looking for yes, no, but finding common ground through looking at what people's priorities are. People say to me, well, abortion's a really easy issue. If you ever say that, you've never been to Ireland to try and talk to people about abortion. Difficult, complicated issues, but trusting the public to give their insight, their thoughts, in a grown-up, deliberative fashion. It's a bit like using drain cleaner. It breaks through all the shit that is in our politics right now to find the truth and find a clean way of thinking about things. And I say this simply, if we don't find a way to involve the public in decision-making, if we don't find a way to rehabilitate that process of democracy, then actually it will be people like me who lose the future of this country, not the Brexiteers who win it. Because we won't have proved there is a better future by cooperation. There is a better future by being able to collaborate and work with other people, by hearing different opinions. My own political movement has a range of views in it. I respect all of them. I want to be part of a process where we hear other people, find that common ground, and move forward. Because that's the kind of country I think we can be and we must be if communities like mine are going to have a better future. Disagree with me on a citizens' assembly? That's fine. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. But what I don't want you to do is walk away from conversations, because I think in the last 2 years we've had enough of that, haven't we, as a country? Too much walking away, shouting, trying to close down debate, rather than listening and finding a way forward. I believe a citizens' assembly could help inform what the question could be in a referendum, who has the vote in a referendum, when we hold that referendum. But I want to hear your views, because it's only when we find that common ground together that Britain will get the kind of politics and the kind of future it deserves.
Thank you for that, Stella. I wanted to introduce Neil Carmichael, former MP for Stroud and President of the Conservatives for People's Assembly. And since you're a former politician technically now, I suppose we can trust you. Stella raised a lot of issues there. One of the questions was what should be on the ballot paper, and if we were to have a citizens' assembly, obviously that would be one of the key questions. What are your own views on what the parameters of that discussion should be?
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here as president of the Conservatives for a People's Vote. I, like Stella, have a track record of fighting for the European Union. That's why I went into politics. That's why I intend to remain in politics. And that's what I intend to fight for here on in. Because this issue, and this is the first point I want to make, is the most important issue all of us in this hall will encounter during our lifetimes. That is a brutal and stark fact, and it is one that we should all remember as we attempt to get a people's vote and then attempt to win a people's vote. Nothing matters more than Britain's membership of the European Union. The second thing I want to say is that there will be people who say, yes, a people's vote is going to be divisive. You know what? We are going to be divided for years to come, no matter what we do. So the task for us is to make sure that we advance the case for a people's vote, consult the people, make sure that they understand why we're consulting them, and make sure that they understand the messages that are so important for this country's future. It is absolutely essential that we do what we can to bring an end to this madness. Now, the thing we've got to do better than we've ever done before, and the thing that we've got to continue to do once we start doing it, is explain why we should be in the European Union. What are the reasons why? I think there are hundreds of them, but I'm going to just run through a few to ram this point home because it has a bearing to the question that I've just been asked. The first thing is, the kind of nation we are is basically defined by the nations we actually work with and are part of. It is that approach to internationalism that has underpinned Britain when it's been really successful and threatened us when we have been less so. So the first point we've got to get across is that this country is international, it believes in internationalism, and by example, we want to be part of international structures, and the European Union is the best example of that. The second thing we've got to make clear is that this country is a country of toleration, of respecting individual rights and respecting individualism. That's what Europe is about. That's what we've fought for. That's what makes our country what it is. And that is yet another reason why we stay in the European Union. If you really care about the environment, and I know most of you in this hall will do so, as I do, then the only way is to make sure that the fifth of the world's gross domestic product, as it is in the European Union, is fighting for the standards, fighting for the policies, together to make sure we protect our environment and leading by example. Anything else is a serious abrogation of responsibility. And if you really care about the people in Sunderland or Leeds or wherever who are clearly feeling that they're not being looked after, then the way to do it is by being part of an economy which is thinking about growth, which is thinking about fairness, which is thinking about productivity, which is thinking about actually making sure we can afford the things that we want. And for the last 40 years, by being in the European Union, that's what we've been able to do. We shouldn't... Thank you, keep going. And you know what? The failures in British domestic policy are our failures, not the failures of the European Union. And that's about the Conservative Party, it's about the Labour Party, and it's about any other party that's happened to have a handle on government. All of us are responsible, all of us should take that responsibility, and all of us will feel a lot better when we do so. So that's what we need to do. Fight for this country's membership of the European Union and fight for the reasons why we are in the European Union. And do not get distracted by other little arguments down various cul-de-sacs. This is too important for that. So the answer to your question is, what needs to be on the ballot paper is stay in or whatever other alternative the other side have got. One choice, and a choice about this country's future, our fabric as a nation, our culture as a people, and our future as an international actor. That's what this is about, and that's what the question should be about. Thank you.
So you would say stay or leave. There would be two choices, and it would be binary on the ballot.
Stay in. And whatever other choice they come up with, which is either the deal which is about to be beaten next week or some alternative. But the fact is, remain, stay in, positive for the future of this country.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Germana Canzi, who is from the 3 Million, which is the main organisation which represents EU citizens living in this country. And I think I know what the answer to the question I'm going to ask you is going to be, but maybe we can widen this out into broader discussion. Who gets a say? Who should be allowed to vote in this referendum, if we have one? You know, we say that there should be a binary choice between leave and remain. We can talk about that some more, but from your perspective, tell me why you think that there's a case for arguing about who gets to make this democratic decision.
From my experience, having spoken to a number of Leave voters as well as Remain voters, they tend to be a bit shocked when they find out that that British citizens living outside, living in the EU for more than 15 years were not able to vote. But they also find it very shocking that, that I, as a European citizen, EU 27 citizen, living in the UK since 1996, I was not allowed to vote. I have met people from countries like Australia and Canada who are in the UK temporarily, and Commonwealth citizens automatically get the vote as soon as they arrive. And this is something that, at the time, well, I didn't know about the Commonwealth citizens at the time when the vote happened. And when the referendum happened at the time, I saw that there was a debate about the franchise. There was a push from the Leave side to exclude European citizens from the vote. At the time, I thought, well, fair enough, this is a vote about the future of this country. So, fair enough. And we didn't realize that it was going to be about us, to the extent that it has been, especially after the referendum. We quickly realized and quickly came together. There was no group representing European citizens before the referendum, unfortunately, but quickly, immediately afterwards, a group of citizens came together and started getting organized. I got involved a few months later. And it became obvious that because we were not allowed to vote, we were effectively not at the table, and we have become the menu. So I'll prove this to you. The Leave campaign specifically said the European citizens that are already here will be able to stay, of course. They will automatically be granted their rights and will be here on no less favorable terms. This is not what happened. What happened with the withdrawal agreement, which we have, by the way, engaged in tremendously. We have been going to meetings in Brussels very intensively at very high level. We've also had some meetings here, not at the same high level. Possibly our access may also to high-level politicians may also be influenced by the fact that we don't vote in national elections. We vote in local elections and in European elections. So what has happened, in fact, is that our rights are being taken away. So we now have to apply to stay in the country that is our home. We have to pay for it. With the idea of an application comes the idea of rejection. A lot of people are extremely worried. So we have people that are having very serious mental health problems. We have a lot of people who are leaving. I have personally many friends, highly qualified people, they have just simply left. And it's not necessarily because they were afraid about their status, but they just don't like the atmosphere. They don't like the fact that all of a sudden we came as equals, we came as free movers. You know, we get talked about as if we couldn't hear anything, as if we couldn't hear what was being said about us. But guess what? We listen to the Today program every day. We hear what is being said. A lot of things are incorrect. Unfortunately, you know, I don't hear a lot of people, even on the Remain side, making the effort to correct those inaccuracies. I would really encourage everybody, please, if there is another referendum, please make more of an effort. And also, just one simple thing. We get talked about as EU migrants. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a migrant, of course, and it is an academic term originally, where if you're comparing different types of migrants, then it makes sense. But if we are being talked about as migrants, and British people in Europe are talked about as expats, immediately there is a sense that we are somehow inferior, and we are not free movers. We are something different. And I think that this is one key message I'd like to leave people with is just simply start talking about us as citizens. And so I have to answer the question. In terms of the referendum, of course, what I'm going to say is that nothing about us should be decided without us. We are the people too, so we would like to be able to vote. I realize I work in, my background is in campaigning, communications. I do understand that it is difficult. I understand it's a difficult, there will be a lot of opposition, but at the same time, this is going to be difficult anyway, and ultimately it's about the values. What kind of values does this country stand for? Is it really acceptable to have a vote where the people who are most affected, European citizens living here and British people in the EU, they are not allowed to vote on something that is absolutely fundamental for their lives? So as much as I understand it is difficult, I would encourage everybody to try and think about how this can be done. And ultimately, because people don't know that this injustice was made, nobody's talking about it apart from us and the British in Europe. Hardly any politician is raising this, and thank you to those who do, but I've hardly ever heard anyone on the Remain campaign point this out. There's a lot of talk about the bus and the broken promises, but hardly anybody talks about the fact that the franchise in itself was an injustice, and the fact that there were a lot of massive inaccuracies about the impact that European citizens have in this country. This has gone completely unchallenged and continues to go unchallenged every single day. So unless this is challenged and unless the debate changes in that sense, then of course it's going to become difficult. But the other thing, we cannot appease xenophobes by just going along with what they're saying.
Thank you. Stella and Neil, we spent a lot of this morning talking about the hurdles the political hurdles that we face in getting to people's vote, a second referendum. To talk about widening the franchise in various ways, there's been discussion as well about allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to vote because obviously it's their future. And there are precedents set for that in other places. But given the political minefield that getting to a people's vote already entails, on a practical level, where do you see any opportunity for widening the franchise?
I think we need to separate out the rhetoric from the practicalities on some of this. And I say this as probably the only politician who's actually been tabling amendments to try and protect freedom of movement, who's been part of the campaign to give 16 and 17-year-olds the vote on all issues in this country, not just in referendum. But I just want to sound, and I'm going to go back to, again, why does it matter that we don't start saying people were lied to, people were stupid, people didn't understand, but trying to say this is about young people versus old people, because it's going back to that Christmas dinner table. Boris and Joe Johnson weren't the only ones who sat around a table with people who disagreed with them on something, but they still loved them. And if, I say this in all honesty to all of you, if we want to win the argument for having a second referendum, then we have to show, because people don't think you actually want a second referendum, they think you want to stop Brexit. And if we're honest, we do. The point is, you want to be able to find a way to bring people together. And those divisions are in the House of Commons as well. And as I said, I respect that people hold different opinions on this issue within my own party, within Parliament. It's not partisan. It cuts across all the different political movements. If you want to make progress on this, you have to be willing to listen and involve other people in that conversation. So I think there is a case to be made for letting 16 and 17-year-olds vote. I think there is a case to be made for a second referendum. I absolutely think we need to look at the franchise. I would disagree with you that it doesn't matter to politicians. I've 10% of my local community is EU citizens. I'm desperately worried about them. They're desperately part of my community, and it's frankly a bit insulting to what all politicians from all parties care about their local communities. They care about the people they represent day in, day out. That is their bread and butter. So we need to try and end this divisive rhetoric within our own way of talking about these issues. One of the reasons why I like, and it's not just Ireland that's had citizens' assemblies, it's Australia, it's Canada, it's Iceland after the banking crash did it with 1,500 people. The point is everybody's opinion can be heard. So everybody is respected as being worthy of being heard. You pick people to represent the demographics of a community rather than a political party, and you bring people into a conversation. You know, one of the things I worry about right now in our politics is it does look like politicians think the public are too stupid to deal with complicated decisions. And then if you look at Parliament, we're not really showing that we can deal with complicated decisions. Let's stop denigrating each other and start finding a way of hearing. It doesn't mean that you have to agree. It means you have to respect the fact that somebody disagrees with you and understand whether they have a point. Because you know what? Sometimes people do. And that means being able to find a way forward that is that compromise. I want a citizens' assembly to be able to go make the argument about having a referendum and what might be on that ballot paper, Neil. But actually, if we prejudge that, we're basically telling people they got things wrong. We're not going to move this country forward. We're not going to win the argument for a second referendum. We're not going to win the argument for the future of this country unless we start being prepared to listen to each other and respect each other. It's surely in short notice in this country right now is respect and willingness to listen. And that's one of the problems we face.
On short notice, we have 4 minutes for questions. So if anyone, I'm going to pick 2 at random, and I'm going to try and pick the lady there, and Peter there at the back.
Hi there, thanks very much for giving up time to be with us. First of all, there has been a citizens' assembly. Not many people know this. It was in Manchester last year, and I think I agree, it's a really excellent way of doing things. I just want to ask the panel, is there not a danger that we're conflating our desire for a second vote and our desire for a Remain outcome? And isn't this guaranteed to put people's backs up? Should we not be trying to get some Leave supporters on board for the idea that people have a right to know what they voted for?
Thank you very much. We'll take the second question, and then the panel can answer which of those they'd like to. Gentleman there. Oh, I pointed at someone, and now no one's got their hand up. This man here, yeah. Yeah.
For the Citizens' Assembly. That seems to be a very crucial issue. It's not just demographic. What other criteria are used? How do you select them?
Okay.
Well, other people deserve to be heard too, but I will answer both those questions.
Right, well, I'm a bit deaf. I'm completely deaf in my left ear, which is sometimes quite handy, but not in this particular room. But I think what we've been asked about are Leave voters and consulting and participating with them, and how do we formulate a council, a citizens' council. Of course we've got to reach out to everybody. That's what politics is all about. Remember that the political process is there to deal with issues which we can't respond to or sort out in a private or other form. And I think that during the run-up to a campaign in a people's vote and for a people's vote, we've got to make sure that this is about involvement of everybody. And I think the word that I sometimes like to use is legitimacy. We've got to legitimize whatever it is that we decide to do. Because my great fear is that we will leave the European Union without that legitimacy, and when it goes wrong, then the political system will really be tested because there'll be a sense that you told us this, but actually something else has happened and we weren't involved. So the legitimacy argument for me is really important, and that necessarily means that everybody needs to be part of the decision. And I think that we have to reach out to people who voted Leave, understand why they voted Leave, and answer some of those concerns, or at least point out that there is another way of thinking. That is absolutely critical. The problem, of course, with a binary choice is that is surprisingly difficult, but the nature of a referendum is that it is, in normal circumstances, a binary choice. I think creating what was the next second question was about forming the commission, which is really Stella's domain. But I'm old enough to remember the Council for Social Democracy, which was created as a forerunner to the SDP. And I'm not suggesting that's what we repeat now. But that was actually, inviting people who really thought about the future and thinking about where they were going and how the country had to be formulated. And that's the kind of situation we might want to envisage. Now, I just want to say two things. My wife happens to be French, so I'm familiar with the arguments that you've just been running through. My children are dual nationality, which is handy for them. And I voted for 16 and 17-year-olds to be part of the referendum the last time round. I was one of the few Tories that did. And I think it's really important that we signal to young people that we are definitely aware that they are the most important group in this, in the sense that they'll be living with the consequences of any decision we make for the longest. So we must show that we are interested, listening, and engaged.
Thank you.
I think obviously that it's really important to involve Leave voters, but also there's a specific example of how bringing up the issue of the 3.6 million European nationals living in this country has actually helped to change minds. There's a brilliant project by a fellow Italian called In Limbo. I invite you to look it up. There's two books, In Limbo and In Limbo 2. The first one gathers stories from Europeans, EU27 citizens who are living in the UK and how they've been feeling since the referendum, with why they came to this country, why they love this country, why they made it their home, but how it has been tremendously difficult since the referendum and what their hopes are for the future. Then In Limbo 2 is about a similar thing with British people living in the EU. What we hear from the stories of this book, it's been sent to politicians all over, and it has also been obviously distributed in various ways. And we've heard stories of Leave voters who were given this book and were so moved by the stories that they actually really changed their mind about, they had not realized the human impact of the vote. So I do believe that, again, it's an argument for making sure that in another debate on a referendum, the stories of people people who have made this country their home do come up. Both, not just to talk about how we've been feeling and how we feel hard done by. That's not necessarily the positive message we want to give, but how we have made wonderful lives. We've built wonderful lives here thanks to freedom of movement. I mean, my life would not exist without freedom of movement because my husband is British and we met in Belgium when he was working there. In terms of how to organize the citizens' assemblies and who to invite, again, we would want to obviously be involved because I think it would be a dramatic mistake if we weren't.
Okay. Put your hands up here if you enjoy being told you did something wrong and you've got to do it all again. Madam, you have the patience of a saint. I have no desire to rerun the last referendum. It was a deeply divisive, horrible time, even in my own local community. What I do have a desire to do is break the deadlock that we have in this country. Yes, 65% of the community I represent voted Remain, but that means 35% voted Leave. I have a duty to all of them to work with all of them. If we want to involve people, we have to find a way in which we do listen to them. I think that Jacob Rees-Mogg should be encouraged to go and give evidence to Citizens' Assembly as well, because the only way it has legitimacy, you're absolutely right, madam, people don't think that we want a second referendum to hear what they have to say and what they think about it. They think we want to tell them they did something wrong, they were lied to, they didn't know what they were doing. Nobody likes being told that, apart from the women at the front here. And, that is the problem. If you want to do a Citizens' Assembly, the other thing I would just flag up to you, one of the merits of a Citizens' Assembly is right now our electoral law says it would probably take about 3 to 6 months to consult on what the question that would then be put to Parliament would be by the Electoral Commission. A citizens' assembly, full stop, would take about 6-7 weeks. What you could do is what they did in British Canada when they did one on electoral reform, which is that you do a random selection of 10,000 people, like a big civic lottery, and you ask people if they want to serve and if they're available the week that you're going to do that citizens' assembly, and then from that you construct a representative sample. Personally, I would have about 500 people on it, because I think actually it is important to make sure that people feel there's somebody from nearby where they live as part of it, to be able to say it's about the demography. I would very clearly select randomly within that group on demographic characteristics. If you're interested in it, there's a brilliant organization called Involve that has done a lot of blogging about the details of other citizens' assemblies. Okay, citizens' assemblies are not a new idea, they're just new to national democracy in this country. But if I leave you with just one thought, it is that if you are going to win the argument, how you get there and the willingness of politicians like myself to listen to the public and involve them in decisions in ways that we haven't done in this country will be absolutely crucial. Doing it within a reasonable timescale in a transparent way will make it even more compelling. If you leave it to us to make the decision, don't be surprised if people feel it's the elite telling them they've got something wrong and they've got to do it again. And that is probably the most divisive thing, because that is about people's power to change the world in front of them. Because if we don't listen to them on one issue, why would we listen to them on others? Let's rehabilitate our politics and in the process give our country a better future.
Thank you.